I'd like to welcome General Scaparrotti, who is back before the committee. I'm sure he's been eagerly awaiting that opportunity. We thank you for your decades of distinguished service and for your leadership of our men and women in uniform. This morning, our thoughts and prayers are with the loved ones of the 4 innocent people killed and dozens more injured in an attack in the heart of London that police believe was inspired by radical Islamist terrorists. We stand in solidarity with the British people, committed as ever to our special relationship and to the common defense of our security and our values. 3 years ago this last week, Russia violated Ukrainian sovereignty and annexed Crimea, a seminal event that revealed what had already been increasingly obvious for years, that the United States and our European allies confront an aggressive, militarily capable Russian government that is hostile to our interests and our values and willing to use force not as a last resort, but as a primary tool to achieve its revisionist objectives. Many believe this challenge had been consigned to the history books, and indeed the United States operated under that assumption for far too long, drastically reducing our military presence, allowing our intelligence capabilities to wither, and unilaterally disengaging from the information fight. I might add that yesterday we received information that Sergei Magnitsky, who was murdered by Vladimir Putin's thugs, his lawyer was thrown from a 4th floor room. I mean, this kind of stuff you can't make up. And it's an indication of Vladimir Putin's feeling of impunity that he can go around killing people without any penalty to pay, and I'm sure that what Mr. Putin was trying to do is send a message to anybody else in Russia who wants to stand up against him. I digress. 3 years later, I regret to say the United States still has not adjusted to the scope, scale, and severity of the new strategic reality we face in Europe. We continue to lack coherent policy and strategy to deter conflict and prevent aggression in Europe. Despite important progress made through the European Deterrence Initiative, we still have no long-term vision for U.S. force posture in Europe, one that accounts for Russia's rapid military modernization, evolving nuclear doctrine, violations of the INF Treaty, advanced access area denial threat concentrated in Kaliningrad, and significant military buildup along its western border. Indeed, as General Scaparrotti points out in his written testimony, and I quote, "The ground force permanently assigned to Eucom is inadequate to meet the combatant command's directed mission to deter Russia from further aggression." The new administration has an opportunity to turn the page and design a new policy and strategy in Europe backed by all elements of American power and decisive political will. General Scaparrotti, we hope you can help this committee begin to think through the basic requirements for such a policy and strategy and what resources and authority you need both as European commander and Supreme Allied Commander Europe to deter and, if necessary, defeat aggression against the United States and our allies. Some of the features of a new approach in Europe are already clear. For example, the need to enhance the forward presence of U.S. military forces and provide defensive lethal assistance to Ukraine. But we still have a lot of work to do in other areas, particularly in countering Russian disinformation and devising gray zone strategies for competition below the threshold of major conflict. What is also clear is that no U.S. policy or strategy in Europe can be successful without our NATO allies. At the 2014 NATO summit in Wales, the leaders of every NATO ally pledged to reach the goal of spending 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024. The good news is that according to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, defense budgets across Europe and Canada increased by 3.8% last year, or by some $10 billion. This is important progress, but we must be careful not to reduce the NATO alliance of the notion of burden sharing to simply 2%. Our allies don't just need to spend more, they need to spend better. One senior European official recently said that Europe spends roughly 50% of the United States on defense, but produces just 15% of the capability the because defense purchases are uncoordinated, duplicative, and inefficient. That's why enhancing European security is not just a job for NATO, but also for the European Union, which has an important role to play in encouraging cooperative defense acquisition and operation of modernized defense equipment. Finally, we must never forget that the essential contributions America's allies make to our national security are not measured in dollars alone. After the September 11th attacks killed 2,600 Americans and 135 citizens of NATO countries, for the first time in history, our NATO allies invoked Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. NATO troops went to fight side by side with American troops in Afghanistan, and over 1,000 of them made the ultimate sacrifice. The price our NATO allies paid in blood, fighting alongside us, should never be diminished, and we must never forget that America is safer and more secure because it has allies that are willing to step up and share the burden of collective security. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this timely and important hearing, and I join you in solidarity with our British allies and applaud your comments. Thanks also to General Scaparrotti for your nearly 40 years of service in the military, your leadership in Afghanistan, and now at U.S. European Command. Also, please pass along our sincere gratitude for the outstanding service of all the men and women who serve with you in Eucom. Thank you, General. The transatlantic relationship is a cornerstone of U.S. national security and the international order. Established at the end of World War II, our European allies and partners have stood with us in maintaining the peace, including in coalition operations in Afghanistan and fighting terrorist extremists in Iraq and Syria. The NATO alliance remains strong and is grounded in the shared vision of an integrated and stable Europe rooted in respect for sovereignty and political and economic freedom. I'm concerned, however, about the mixed signals that the current administration seems to be sending regarding the U.S. commitment to NATO and the willingness to cut a deal with Russia. Secretary Tillerson's reported decision to skip a NATO foreign ministers meeting next month and take a trip to Moscow prior to a NATO summit in May has raised concerns in some European capitals. I urge Secretary Tillerson to reconsider his attendance at NATO next month and send a strong signal of our unwavering support for the alliance. The broad and growing challenges facing the Eucom commander mean that alliance unity is more important than ever. The cohesion of NATO is being directly threatened by Russia. President Putin has repeatedly shown he will use military force to assert a Russian sphere of influence over its neighbors and to undermine their further integration into Europe. Nowhere is this more evident than in Ukraine, where Russia has used hybrid warfare tactics to seize Crimea and continues to support militarily and financially Russian-led separatists in eastern Ukraine, in violation of Russia's commitments under the Minsk agreements. As we heard at Tuesday's panel of distinguished former government officials, it is critically important that we assist Ukraine in resisting Russian pressure and instituting democratic reforms. A successful reformed Ukraine would provide a powerful alternative to Putin's autocratic rule. The United States has taken significant steps in recent years to rebuild its military presence in Europe and reassure our allies and partners threatened by renewed Russian aggression. The European Deterrence Initiative, or EDI, and the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence have increased the rotational presence of forces in Eastern Europe. In addition, while many NATO members continue to fall short of the 2% of GDP target for defense spending, defense budgets among NATO nations are increasing, and a number of allies are making significant in-kind contributions as well. Questions remain, however, whether we have the appropriate mix of forces in Europe, both quantitatively and qualitatively, and I hope you will address these questions this morning. Russia is deploying the full array of tools in the Kremlin playbook to challenge the West. This includes aggressive actions in the nuclear realm. I agree with the experts on Tuesday's panel regarding the importance of responding strongly to Russia's fielding of a missile system in violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or INF Treaty. In addition, Russia's nuclear doctrine of escalate to de-escalate is not only deeply disturbing, but potentially catastrophic. Also disconcerting is Russia's increasing boldness in using non-military tools to target Western democracies and advance Putin's strategic aims. Russia is employing an array of covert and overt asymmetric weapons in the gray zone, short of military conflict, including cyber hacking, disinformation, propaganda, economic leverage, corruption, and even political assassination. To counter this insidious Russian interference, we must begin by recognizing it as a national security threat. Further, the intelligence community has warned that the kinds of Kremlin-directed malign activities witnessed in last year's U.S. presidential election are likely to reoccur in the future, including during elections in France, Germany, and elsewhere in Europe this year. Responding to this national security threat will require a whole-of-government approach and a comprehensive strategy for pushing back against Russia broadly. Eucom faces a number of other challenges as well. This includes increasing instability in the Balkans, where Russian influence operations are feeding Serbian resentments both in Serbia and among Bosnian Serbs. In addition, in the Balkans, where traditionally a moderate form of Islam has been practiced, there are growing Islamic Salafist influences as a result of a mosque-building campaign funded by Saudi Arabia. On its southeastern border, Eucom must contend with the instability arising from Syria and the transnational threats emanating from that conflict. And to the south, the migration crisis in the Mediterranean countries continues to strain European resources for security. General, I'm interested in hearing how NATO is handling this myriad of problems, or these myriad of problems, and how the United States can be helpful. Again, I want to thank General Scaparrotti for his service, and I look forward this morning to his testimony.
Good morning, General. Welcome.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee, I'm honored to testify today as the Commander of the United States European Command. On behalf of over 60,000 permanently assigned service members, as well as civilians, contractors, and their families who serve and represent our nation in Europe, thank you for your support. Before starting, I would like to also express my condolence on behalf of the entire European Command team for the civilians and policemen killed and wounded in yesterday's terrorist attack in the UK. Our thoughts and prayers go out to these victims and their families impacted by this senseless attack. We strongly condemn this attack and will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our NATO ally and our partners to defeat terrorism. Chairman, the European theater remains critical to our national interests. The Transatlantic Alliance gives us a unique advantage over our adversaries, a united, capable, warfighting alliance resolved in its purpose and strengthened by shared values that have been forged in battle. Eucom's relationship with NATO and the 51 countries within our AOR provides the United States with a network of willing partners who support global operations and secure international rules-based order. Our security architecture protects more than 1 billion people and has safeguarded transatlantic trade, which now constitutes almost half of the world's GDP. However, this security architecture is being tested, and today we face the most dynamic European strategic environment in recent history. Political volatility and economic uncertainty are compounded by threats to our security system that are trans-regional, multi-domain, and multifunctional. In the East, a resurgent Russia has turned from partner to antagonist as it seeks to reemerge as a global power. Countries along Russia's periphery, including Ukraine and Georgia, struggle against Moscow's malign activities and military actions. In the Southeast, strategic drivers of instability converge on key allies, especially Turkey, which has to simultaneously manage Russia terrorist and refugee flows. In the South, violent extremists and transnational criminal elements spawn terror and corruption from North Africa to the Middle East, while refugees flee to Europe in search of security and opportunity. And in the High North, Russia is reasserting its military presence and positioning itself for strategic advantage in the Arctic. In response to these challenges, Eucom has shifted its focus from security cooperation and engagement to deterrence and defense. Accordingly, we are adjusting our posture, our plans, our readiness, so that we remain relevant to the threats we face. In short, we are returning to the historic role as a warfighting command focused on deterrence and defense. Eucom's transition would not be possible without the congressional support of the European Deterrence Initiative. Thanks in large measure to ERI or EDI, over the last 12 months, Eucom has made clear progress with an enhanced forward presence, or force presence, complex exercises and training, infrastructure improvements, increased pre-positioning of equipment and supplies, and partner capacity building throughout Europe. But we cannot meet these challenges alone. In response to Russian aggression, Eucom has continued to strengthen our relationship with strategic allies and partners, including the Baltic nations, Poland, Turkey, and Ukraine. Eucom has also strengthened ties with Israel, one of our closest allies. And above all, Eucom has supported the NATO alliance, which remains, as Secretary Mattis said, the bedrock of our transatlantic security. Thus, Eucom posture is growing stronger, and I remain confident in our ability to effect this transition. But there's much work to do. We must not only match, but outpace the modernization and advances of our adversaries. We must invest in the tools and capabilities needed to increase effectiveness across the spectrum of conflict. And we must ensure that we have a force that is credible, agile, and relevant to the dynamic demands of this theater. To this end, Eucom has identified the following focus areas: ISR collection platforms that improve timely threat information and strategic warning, land force capabilities that deter Russia from further aggression, enhanced naval capabilities for anti-submarine warfare, strike warfare, and amphibious operations, pre-positioned equipment to increase our responsiveness to crisis, and enhanced missile defense systems. Let me conclude by again thanking this committee's members and staff for their continued support of Eucom, not only through increased funding, but also by helping us to articulate the challenges that lie before us. Support from other senior leaders and, above all, the public at home and across Europe is vital to ensuring that we have a ready and relevant force. This remains a pivotal time for Eucom as we transition to meet the demands of a dynamic security environment. I remain confident that through the strength of our alliances and partnerships, and with the professionalism of our service members, we will adapt and ensure Europe remains whole, free, and at peace. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I ask the committee, since a quorum is now present, I ask the committee to consider a list of 62 pending military nominations. All of these nominations have been before the committee the required length of time. Is there a motion favorably to report these 62 military nominations?
So moved.
Senate, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. General, do you have any general comment about the attack yesterday in London and the significance of it?
So the attack in London underscores, again, the dynamic environment in Europe. Europe is challenged by both a flow of terrorists returning to Europe from Syria and other places. They're challenged by an internal threat of those inspired by ISIS or directed by ISIS, and this is an example of the attacks that we've seen in Europe in the past year. It's a difficult challenge. As I said, we remain solid and stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies in NATO to defeat this threat.
Likelihood of further actions like this, particularly some that are self-indoctrinated, is very hard to stop.
It is, sir, and I would just say that, you know, the number of threat streams that we have of this type within Europe, it's probably higher in Europe than any other part of the globe, with the exception of the places that we're actually physically fighting them, like Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq.
Is there a connection between that and refugees?
The flow of refugees and those who move them, particularly criminal activities that will help move them, they also are more than willing to move both equipment, personnel, weapons, and people.
As you know, there was an attempted coup in Montenegro by the Russians, and the Montenegrin membership in NATO is pending, and 26 of the 28 nations, I believe, have already registered their approval. It's a small country, only 650,000 people. It's very strategically located, as you know. What's your view of the importance of Montenegrin, especially since they have completed all of the very difficult procedures necessary to become eligible? What's your view of the importance of their inclusion in NATO?
Chairman, it's absolutely critical that they be brought into NATO, as they've had this desire, they've met the map, and it underscores NATO's outreach and ability to bring in those who want to determine their own means of government, become a part of NATO. If we were to lose this, it would set back many of the other countries and peoples, particularly in Eastern Europe, who are looking forward to and have their eyes set on the West and NATO becoming a part of NATO.
So it's very important.
I think it's critical, yes.
I thank you. Finally, I know you talked about the military presence and necessary for additional forces in Europe, but one of the problems we continue to face, for example, one of the causes of the attempted coup in Montenegro, is the saturation of propaganda emanating from Russia. We all know the controversy here in the United States about our election, but we now see them active in the French election, apparently in the German election, but more importantly, they're inundating the Baltics in particular. What's our ideas, or rather than ask for strategy, what's our ideas as how to counter what is emerged as one of the greatest threats to stability in Europe?
Chairman, I think first of all, we have to confront this threat as it is, be sober-minded about it. We have to do it as an alliance and with our partners, and we have to call it out. We have to confront it. There seems to be a reluctance in many of the nations to actually confront it when we see it publicly take it on. And I think we, as partners, have to form together and begin to do this. As you said, it's prolific, and I believe we've got to confront it in a very direct way.
We countered Russian propaganda during the Cold War with Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, and all I've seen so far is disarray in Prague about the role, the funding, the strategies, and all that. What do you think we need to do there to have our own effective counter message to be sent? And
Well,
I know that's not exactly in your area of responsibility, but I think it's a kind of warfare.
Sure it is. It is. The Russians see this as a part of that spectrum of warfare. That's their asymmetric approach. I'll start here. You know, we have information operations that are military, and I have those that are countering malign influence in Europe. But what we really need is we need a whole-of-government approach, a whole-of-government information campaign, of which I'm a small part of that. We need somebody in lead of that. And then we need to finance it and form a governmental strategy. As you said, in the Cold War, we had one. I don't think there is a start on that. We have what's called the RIG, the Russian Information Group, which is a beginnings of that. But that has to be reinforced. It has to be financed. They have to have the authorities that they need to lead that forward.
And the lead on that would probably be the State Department, right?
It is. The RIG is co-chaired with Eucom, and the State Department's the lead. Yes, sir.
So it wouldn't help you any if we slashed the spending for the State Department.
No, sir.
Senator Reid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in fact, you anticipated one of the questions I wanted to raise about the malign influences in elections and institutional capacity that are evident in Europe today. And I think I can safely say that we're really not organized to deal with it at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I agree. We can get much better organized to deal with this than we are today.
And let me just go a step further and say that, in your estimate, what are the strategic effects that the Russians are trying to achieve by these activities? That this is not sort of a random kind of just stir up trouble for the sake of stirring trouble. What's the strategic objectives?
Sir, their overall objective is to undermine the governments that oppose them, to reinforce the political parties in each of those countries that might be aligned with them, to demonstrate the weakness of the West and undermine the U.S. in the West. They want to ensure that they can dominate, particularly their periphery, and they're doing that through this asymmetric approach.
Now, you've indicated that you're, particularly with the European Defense Initiative, the Response Initiative, are beginning to reorganize, re-equip, et cetera. Can you give us a sense of your priorities? You had a long list of activities that you feel you have to undertake, but the top 3 issues that you have to get accomplished in the near future.
So the top three that we have to get accomplished, I think, first of all, is we have to get our posture correct for deterrence. And that's across all the services. That's not just, we tend to focus on the Army part of this, but each of the services play a role in that. Secondly, we have to ensure that our command has made the transition to a command that can command and control in the dynamic environment and against an aggressor like Russia. We just recently had our command post exercise we have every 2 years. It was a great exercise, but what it laid out is the changes we have yet to make within the component commands in Europe in order to fight a foe like Russia.
And with respect to the Ukraine, our expert Colonel Tusi, who did a superb job, suggested that that's really the critical arena at the moment, that if they're able to subvert the Ukraine, then that'll send shockwaves throughout Europe. Is that your assessment? And just generally, how are we collectively, both NATO, the United States, Eucom, and the EU, doing in terms of our efforts in the Ukraine?
I think the good news with respect to Ukraine is that we're unified and we're organized. NATO has a defense fund that supports it along the very similar lines to the U.S. Thankful to Congress for its funding of our activities there. In fact, we lead a multinational joint commission, which is actually the vehicle that among our allies and the U.S. assesses and then directs the reform that needs to take place in conjunction with Ukraine. They also do the assessment of the needs in terms of equipment and training and guide that training. So we're actually doing that together with our partners as well as NATO through that one body, and I think it's very effective.
And in that regard, a great deal of my impression is that of the civilian capacity building, the anti-corruption efforts is being done by the European Union, and so that their efforts are absolutely critical to your success. Is that fair?
That's true, sir, and it is critical. And, you know, our connection to EU as well as NATO's has been in the forefront here for the past year or so for many reasons, and that's one of them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, General. It's nice to see you again. As you know, last week, General Salva confirmed Russia's deployment of weapons system that violates the INF Treaty. And he went on to say that, quote, "The system itself presents a risk to most of our facilities in Europe, and we believe that the Russians have deliberately deployed it in order to pose a threat to NATO and to facilities within the NATO area of responsibility," end quote. You touched on this in your opening statement on page 5, and you said that the system creates a mismatch in escalatory options. Could you please elaborate on what you mean by that and what the implications are of this deployment?
Well, this deployment gives them some advantage in terms of reach and precision within their systems. And when we talk about escalation management, if there is a tension or a crisis with Russia, because of their doctrine and their view that they will escalate to dominate or escalate to de-escalate, it creates a very tight range of options when we work through escalation management. So an enhancement like that just makes this very restrictive and difficult management process you go through in deterrence that just that much more pressurized. So it's a critical enhancement. It's one that we need to respond to.
Well, you say we need to respond, and you just mentioned options, the word options. Secretary Carter talked about options. He mentioned counterforce, countervailing capabilities, active defenses, but we didn't see any real action in order to pursue those. Do you think that we need to?
Yes, I think we do.
And which of these options do you think would be the most effective in dealing with this?
If I could, I'd like to take that as for a response for the record. I need to think about the comparison of those actually to tell you the best response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
At a recent hearing of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, which I chair, we discussed the implications of Russia's nuclear strategy, often referred to as the escalate, de-escalate. And General Kaler, who's a former commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, made the point that the Russian approach reinforces the value of NATO remaining a nuclear alliance, as well as the need for the deterrent value provided by U.S. nuclear weapons that are stationed in Europe. In your written statement, you say that NATO and U.S. nuclear forces continue to be a vital component of our deterrence. Our modernization efforts are crucial. We must preserve a ready, credible, and safe nuclear capability. Do you agree that NATO must remain a nuclear alliance and that the U.S. must continue to station those nuclear weapons on the European continent?
Yes, Senator, absolutely I do.
Can you outline to us specific benefits that we receive by having those stationed there?
Well, first of all, it provides an immediate response that's within the NATO alliance as opposed to just the U.S. It represents the alliance and a response by 28 nations, a commitment by 28 nations that we will deter and will deter their nuclear forces. I think that alone is significant. Secondly, it gives us some other options because we have not only the U.S., but other contingents that provide essential capabilities within that nuclear capability. So there's more agility there as well.
And it recognizes the importance of deterrence. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Scaparrotti, for being here this morning and for your service to the country. I want to follow up on the line of questioning that Senators McCain and Reid started on the whole information warfare issue. When former General Breedlove was before the committee earlier this week, he pointed out that recently Russia has established an information warfare division within its armed forces. Do you think NATO should be looking at something like that? Are there already efforts underway? You talked about the RIG group, but should we be doing more within NATO to address the propaganda that Russia's putting out throughout Europe? And the United States, by the way.
Yes, Senator. I think in the United States, you know, we have organization. I think to effectively operate, what we need to do is policy and then actions that flow from that within the United States. That's a whole-of-government approach. That's probably not the structure that we have in the way that we need it today. So it's more of a whole-of-government response, I would tell you. I think we're pretty agile in the military rather than establishing some information command, et cetera. We have smaller units that tactically execute these kinds of missions. I have them in Eucom. Within NATO, NATO has taken this on as well. But it's somewhat nascent at this point, and I think we do have to pursue that. I mean, we've got an adversary here who's using this to very good benefit, and we have to compete short of conflict in this area as well.
But as you point out, we don't really have a strategy to do that, and we don't have anybody in charge of that in the United States government. I mean, we have the Global Engagement Center that's starting up in the State Department. I've spoken, as I'm sure others have, with the continuation of the efforts we had during the Soviet Union when we had the Cold War and we had Radio Free Europe, and they did a terrific job in those days, but we don't have a continuation of that is part of sharing and cooperating with factually presenting what's happening in the West compared to what's going on with Russia's propaganda. So where should that effort be located? Do you have thoughts about who should participate in that and how we better coordinate what we're doing?
Yes, Senator, I do. I think actually the RIG, the Russian Information Group, which I mentioned, is actually a good structure to start with. It has state as the lead, co-chaired with European Command. It has all of the other agencies involved in that. The GEC is a key leader in that, which has been empowered to do the communication piece of the state. But, it's not robustly supported. I don't believe that it has the kind of focus and priority that we need to have. And so therefore it exists, but it needs to really be reinforced, funded. And then, as you said, I think we have all the talent and creativity we need in this nation to do this better than anybody else. We just need to decide to do it.
Thank you. There was a report, actually, I agree with you. I just want to make that clear. There was a report earlier this week about Russia training Kurdish fighters, and it wasn't clear to me to what extent they were doing that. But how is Turkey responding to that report? Are they concerned about what Russia is doing, and how does that affect their sort of growing rapprochement with Russia?
Senator, I've not talked to my counterpart, the Chad in Turkey, since this report came out. So we've not talked directly. I can't tell you exactly what their response on this would be. But given my association with them and their concern about the PKK and associated groups, Kurd groups that are aligned with them, I think they would have great concern about it. They want to ensure that the attacks that they have from the PKK aren't reinforced in any way. Turkey does. They also want to ensure that they don't have the cantonments in Syria are not connected, so they have a Kurdish entity across their entire southern border. And given those two objectives, I think they're very concerned about it, probably.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, General, last weekend I was in the Ukraine and was observing their training. It's the 45th does a great job. In fact, that's the same group that not long ago was providing the same training in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so they're going to be there for a year long. And I watched that, and there's really an art to that, and they're doing a great job, because most people think that they're there to train the Ukrainians or wherever they're stationed, but they're really to train them to train the others, and there's a big difference. So I want you to know that there's really doing a good job. Then right during the parliamentary elections, 2014, I was with Poroshenko in the crowd, when, of course, they had that huge success. The first time in 96 years, no communists is in the parliament there. And so, as you know, it became very controversial when after that took place and Putin started killing Ukrainians. We wanted to provide the lethal defensive assistance. Our committee was pretty much unanimous on that. The administration was not that excited about it. So we, in both the fiscal year 16, we authorized $300,000, and in fiscal year 17, authorized $350,000 for the security assistance for the Ukraine, including lethal assistance such as anti-armor weapons. So General Dunford, during his nomination hearing, said in his quote, he said, "I think it's reasonable that we provide that lethal support for the Ukrainians. And frankly, without that kind of support, we're not going to be able to protect themselves against the Russia aggression." So I'd kind of get your idea. Do you agree with him? Do you agree also that we need to provide that assistance? What are we providing now, and how much more should we?
Senator, thank you. In short, yes, I do agree with him. I've been there twice recently. I would note that I agree. The Guard is doing a very good job there, and an important one in their training relationship with the Ukrainians. In terms of lethal support, the Ukrainians are in a very tough fight, which you saw. They're very disciplined soldiers. But they're facing what we say are separatists. They're actually Russian proxies in my mind. They're being provided very lethal equipment. The Russians are providing the separatists that. The Russians are also testing some of their new TTPs there. So, you know, we need to reinforce the Ukrainian military as much as we can and provide them the best opportunity to fight what is a very lethal Russian proxy at this point.
Well, and I agree with that. Well, I have a question for the record as to what kind of equipment specifically we should do. But I want to mention one thing. Do you happen to know, his name is Fatmir Mehdi. He was the Secretary of Defense in the Albanian Defense. They had a meeting, and I happened to be attending that meeting. It was in January 31st, kind of a roundtable talking about ISIS and the threat in the Balkans, and it was kind of revealing. And apparently, a lot of the ISIS recruiting is taking place in the Balkans right now. And do you have any comment to make as to what our activity is there in terms of what the threat is there, and are we working with them as closely as we should?
I'm very concerned about the stability in the Balkans, and one of the reasons is that what is generally a moderate or Western-looking Islamic population is increasingly being affected by extremist influence there. And part of that is recruiting for ISIS. Mm-hmm. And so it's a trend right now. It's one I think we have to pay very close attention to.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate it. Now, my time has expired, but I do want to, for the record, I'd like to get as specific information as we could as to what best we could afford to send over there against the aggression that they have. Okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, General. As was mentioned earlier, it's being reported that our Secretary of State will be missing the NATO Summit of Foreign Ministers in a couple of weeks. This obviously comes at a time when the administration has criticized the value of NATO. Russia is meddling in European elections, and Russia is threatening our NATO allies in the Baltics. Do you have any opinions on whether this sends the right signal to our NATO allies, and what kind of messages do you think we should be sending to our NATO allies at this time?
Senator, I think it's essential that NATO, our allies in NATO, understand that we're absolutely committed to the alliance and continue to be a key leader within the alliance. I noted this morning that the Secretary General and the Secretary had met, and they're looking for a date that all of the allies can meet for the Foreign Ministers Conference, and I hope that is in fact worked out, and that becomes the reality.
As do I. General, Russian denial, deception, disinformation were all important parts of the hybrid warfare campaign that we saw during the illegal seizure of Crimea and its Russian support for separatists in eastern Ukraine. As Eucom commander, you lead much of the effort to identify and attribute Russian disinformation operations. Can you describe for us how Russia is organized to conduct this kind of information warfare, and what techniques you're seeing on display in the Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you. You know, when you're talking about this, you'd think about it in a military organization, but frankly, what's I think is important is that Russia actually has a very broad set of groups to include their intelligence groups that are doing this. So they actually have a whole of government approach on this, which I think makes it one more difficult. It's one of the reasons that we also see what I think is a pretty rapid or agile use of social media, TV,
Absolutely.
You know, cyber, et cetera. So, you know, it's a force to be reckoned with at this point. And I think it's that organization that gives them the agility.
Do you have recommendations on in terms of building our capacity or that of our allies and partners in the region to be able to resist these kinds of Russian influence activities?
Well, I think first of all, in Eucom, we have elements that are today have missions to counter Russian malign influence, both to identify it, counter it, and then third, we're building partner capacity, and we're exchanging techniques, et cetera. Estonia has an excellent cyber center of excellence, for instance. That's a key node in NATO. We work very closely with that. So we need to continue those kinds of partnerships and exchange of skill and understanding of how they're working. And I think, particularly as an alliance, we can counter this.
I think because of their proximity, we actually have a lot to learn from our Balkan partners. And given what we've seen even in our own elections, it's time to learn those lessons. Russia's air defense systems, like the S-300 and S-400, threaten to block our ability to be able to project power in the event of a conflict in the European region, particularly in the Baltics. This certainly undermines the U.S. and NATO's Article 5 commitment to the defense of these allies and raises concerns about the alliance's ability to deter an increasingly aggressive Russia. How capable are the Russian air defense systems, particularly in Kaliningrad?
Sir, I would just state, in an unclassified venue, they're very capable. The newer systems like the S-400 is a definite enhancement in their capabilities. That's why we're concerned about it. As you stated, their location in Kaliningrad, in Crimea, in the Mediterranean, provides difficulty for our access and mobility. We can counter this. I'm confident of that, but
Do you have opinions in that regard on what types of next generation technologies, for example, will need to effectively counter the Russian A2AD capabilities?
well, up front, what I talked about in terms of our advanced aircraft, fifth generation, enhanced munitions, particularly long-range precision munitions, electronic warfare, those things generally is what we need to continue our modernization efforts on. And if you'd like, I could give you a more specific and a classified response, obviously.
I appreciate that, General. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for your service. I appreciate the opportunity to visit for just a few minutes today. With regard to Montenegro, the chairman had begun the discussion in terms of the possibilities that they could become a member of NATO. If they were to become a member of NATO, what would you expect the Russian response to be, and how would you prepare for it?
Senator, I think we've probably seen their response in terms of their activity and their attempt to block that. I think to a certain extent they know this is going to happen. I trust it will. In a conversation with one of the NATO's ministers, one of the countries that has communication with Russian leadership, he shared with me that a Russian leader told him that Putin had said he lost Montenegro, but there will not be another Montenegro. I think that's an indication of how they think and how important it is to them that these other nations that seek to have a democratic government and turn to the West are under threat. It's one of the reasons that I think Russia continues to have frozen conflicts and be present in places like Georgia and Ukraine, because it's their means of controlling that.
When you've got extensive background in Europe, you know a number of the European leaders. With the change in administrations, naturally, there's going to be some questions in terms of policy changes, decision-making processes, and so forth. What questions are you getting from your European contacts in terms of leaders, and what concerns do they have?
Well, I think, first of all, it was, as a new administration comes in, they want to ensure that we're committed to the alliance and the security of the transatlantic AOR. And, for instance, Secretary Mattis at the first NATO meeting at the Defense Ministers Conference made that our commitment very clear, as did Vice President Pence at Munich, and I think that's critical. They look to that. They also now look to what are the policies, and are the policies consistent with security in the transatlantic region. Of course, in a new administration, they're looking forward to policies with respect to NATO, policies with respect to Afghanistan and others.
When it comes to doing your job, you clearly have to have the tools and the tools in proper working order in order to get the job done. If you could give us a list of those areas that you have the most concern with our capabilities today, and I'll just give you an example. The fact that right now, if we have one task force leaving the Mediterranean, coming through, and another one going in some cases we're actually stopping in the middle of the Mediterranean and trading ammo because we don't have enough ammo to literally maintain operational capabilities in multiple task forces. Those types of things concern us. We have a nuclear submarine sitting at the dock because it literally we can't get the maintenance done on it so that it's certified to dive at this stage of the game. A nuclear submarine, the readiness clearly is not there in some cases. Do you have issues right now under your command that you would share with us and that you have concerns with?
Senator, I'd like to get into detail on a classified or closed session, but generally I would say this. The demands of our security strategy today and the dynamic world that we're working in requires us to have more capacity than we have today in our armed forces. You noted the Navy. So in Europe, I don't have the carrier or the submarine capacity that would best enable me to do my job in Eucom. It's sufficient, but it is not what ideally I'd like to have to deter Russia, assure our allies, build their capacity, work with them on the basis that we need to work with them. So that's an example of the areas. Now, you mentioned munitions. I am concerned about that as well because, we are using munitions today in those places where we're in conflict. And the adversaries that we face, for instance, Russia or China or in North Korea, will be high-intensity conflicts. And we have to invest in the stockpiles that we need, and we also have to invest in enhancing those munitions so that as we look to the future, we don't find ourselves in a position where our adversaries have outpaced us.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Scaparrotti, for being here today. Certainly appreciate your testimony, and also wanted to thank you for being very generous with your time at the Munich Security Council or conference, where we had an opportunity to discuss many of these issues at length. General, as you're well aware, we're increasingly relying on space, cyberspace, and fiber optic communications cables in all aspects of our lives, and these systems are also critical for social and economic activity, and their assured access and availability is vital to the U.S. Strategic stability. And when you look at Russia's Navy operations right now in the Eucom theater, which includes a significant footprint in the Arctic, which is growing dramatically without necessary response from us, and a $2.4 billion expansion of the Black Sea Fleet by 2020, Russia appears committed to bolstering their military infrastructure on Eucom's flanks. This increased ops tempo includes naval activity that suggests that Russia right now is exploring undersea cable vulnerabilities at much greater depths, depths where the cables are difficult to monitor and breaks are harder to repair. So my question is, in general, what is your assessment as to whether or not we have sufficient redundancy within Eucom's command and controlled architecture to include ballistic missile defense systems to withstand a coordinated attack on our undersea, terrestrial, and space-based communication systems that you rely on?
Sir, what I'd like to do is respond to that in a classified venue, so I can give you a very accurate answer. I'm confident of our ability to operate today. As I just said, we just did our command post exercise, and we were looking at that. But we need to modernize what we have today in terms of command and control, as you noted, in order to have the right kind of resilience with the adversary that we face. You need a good deal of redundancy, to be sure. And that's one of the areas, if you note in a classified venue what I've asked of OSD, that's one of the key areas that I think we need to work on, is the C4 structure within Europe.
Well, I'd appreciate that. And actually following up on Senator Heinrich's questions too, as you come back to brief on some of the A2, AD capabilities, I'd be interested in learning more about that, particularly when it comes to next generation, what we need to be investing in today to be ready for the years ahead as warfare changes dramatically in the next few years. But based on capabilities, and follow up my last question here related to capabilities, in the fiscal year 16 NDAA budget, I co-led an effort to enhance lethality of the Stryker vehicles with a 30-millimeter cannon. This was in response to an operational need statement from the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, whose Strykers were the heaviest vehicles permanently stationed in Europe at that time. And I understand that the work to add the 30-millimeter cannon to Strykers is going well, with the first prototype was successfully delivered last October, and training is beginning on those vehicles. The ERI also provides funds for upgrading the Abrams tanks to be pre-positioned in Europe as well. So could you just provide a update on the need for this capability and how we need to, if we need to continue to be moving forward, and that any lapses in that upgrade, either of the Abrams or the Stryker, is a problem or not for you?
Senator, thank you very much. It's not a problem for me, but it is a priority.
Right.
Given the adversary that we have, who continues to modernize, particularly Russia, is modernizing their armored force as well as, in each one of their services, they're making advancements. So it's critical that we outpace that we provide our soldiers, in this case, the very best equipment that we can, and we continue to upgrade it. Abrams is a fine tank, but as technology changes, we can make upgrades to it and make it better, and we make it better in terms of defense as well, and we owe that to our soldiers.
And the Stryker as well.
And Stryker as well, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, General. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, good to see you. Thanks for spending time with a number of us in Munich. Do you agree that one of the most important strategic advantages we have in terms of our national security is that we are an ally-rich nation, our adversaries are ally-poor?
Senator, absolutely.
And do you also agree that the ally-poor nations like Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, that they recognize that, they don't have many allies at all, and that they try to undermine our alliances? Isn't that what certainly Vladimir Putin's up to?
Yes, sir. I think his intent is actually to fracture NATO, and I think it's because he does fear NATO. He knows the power of that alliance.
So given that, are we doing enough diplomatically, militarily, right now, the Trump administration, to reinforce our alliances, expand our alliances, deepen our alliances? What's your assessment of what we're doing and what we could be doing better, whether it's in the military realm or diplomatic realm? How are we doing on that?
Sir, I think we absolutely have a focus on building partner capacity, building our relationships with our partners. We're a leader in NATO. From a Eucom perspective, that's something, I mean, we work on this every day. I don't think there's any question of that, particularly on the military side. It's a very close relationship with our partners. It's day to day. It works both ways. We learn from our alliance partners as well.
Are there things that you recommend that we could do more of or better in that regard? It's really, really an important issue. Or the Senate. We play a big role in terms of our allies, treaties.
Well, I think, in terms of The alliance itself, here again, I keep coming back to it, but I think it's whole of government in the sense that every agency in the government does their part, and it's clear to our allies that from every agency in the United States that the alliance is important, and it shows and demonstrates in its actions that the alliance is the bedrock of transatlantic security. So there's no disagreement in what they see in terms of action, not just on the military side, but in terms of our diplomacy, our information, our economics, et cetera.
I want to switch over to an issue that a number of us have been focused on, and we've had discussions on it, is what's happening in the Arctic and the importance, the increasing importance of that region in terms of strategic resources, transportation, a lot of concerns of our NATO allies like the Norwegians and others about the significant Russian buildup in the Arctic. And as you know, it doesn't look like a friendly buildup. 4 new brigade combat teams, a new Arctic military command, very aggressive actions in the high north, including a military exercise that was a snap exercise with close to 50,000 troops that Eucom was barely aware of, which is kind of in and of itself not a good sign. A number of us, Senator King, the chairman, were concerned enough that we didn't have a strategy on that, so we required the Secretary of Defense to actually put forward a new Arctic strategy. There's a classified and unclassified version. Have you read that?
I have not read it, no.
So I would highly recommend that you take a look at it because it's the new DoD strategy. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than the one that was previously published by DoD, which was pretty much a joke. And so, of course, Eucom has a lot of important elements to play in that strategy. But one of the things it emphasizes, it does talk about our strategic interests, which the last strategy didn't even bother to do. But one of the things it emphasizes is looking at freedom of navigation operations, the ability to actually push back on the Russian buildup, which includes 40 icebreakers, 13 more under construction, several new seaports and harbors. But although it emphasizes fawn ops, do you think right now, if Russia decided to deny access to vital U.S. or Arctic shipping lanes in the Arctic region, that you as the commander of Eucom, could you provide the President an option of conducting a surface fawn op to challenge that act, like we're trying to do in the South China Sea, given our assets right now? Because the strategy emphasizes fawn ops, but it certainly seems like the means that we have right now wouldn't enable you to make such a recommendation to the President. What do you think about that, General?
I think it would depend as well on the circumstances in terms of the location and time of year because of the assets that we have as well. As you know, the Northern Sea Route lays in closest proximity to Russia's coastline as well, which complicates that given their military buildup. So we clearly need to invest more in the kind of assets that help us in the Arctic. So that's how I would respond to that, Senator. We can give options. We certainly need to improve our capabilities, and I'm concerned as well about our capabilities with respect to the high north and security of the North Atlantic, et cetera.
That's just a diagram of what the Russians are doing. It's pretty significant.
Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, General, I want to thank you for you and your staff for preparing and presenting to the committee this map, which I think is extraordinary. I'm a great believer that you can't confront your adversaries unless you understand them and unless you understand how they think. And to me, the amazing or very interesting and illuminating part of this map is it shows the borders of the Soviet Union in 1989 and today, the borders of Russia. And essentially, from Putin's point of view, his border retreated about 1,000 miles across a whole front of Eastern Europe. And clearly that's part of his worldview in terms of Russia's proper place in the world. Would you agree?
Yes, sir, I agree. That's why I think the map's illustrative, because I think if you're Putin, you're looking out from Moscow, and you see what I think he would consider to have been his strategic buffer. It tells you a bit about his mindset, and for what we know about him, he feels as though he's been encroached upon, that he has a sphere of influence that he believes are rightfully his. Of course, these are nations that have a right to determine their own government.
And part of Russia's history is a kind of paranoia about the West, going back to Frederick the Great and probably even Napoleon. They have, in fact, been invaded from the West. And again, that contributes to this mindset. Would you not agree?
I agree, sir. Yes, sir.
And that gets to my real concern, and I've raised this in other hearings, both in the South China Sea or in Europe, is the danger of an accidental war, a danger of misunderstanding, confusion, leading to some kind of escalation. What protections do we have from a misunderstanding? For example, we deploy what we consider a defensive rocket battery, a missile battery in Poland, and the Russians read that as an aggressive act, and it goes from there. How do we ensure that doesn't happen? As I view the world today, I think this is our gravest sort of state-to-state danger, is misunderstanding and leading to accidental conflict.
Yes, sir. I mean, the thing that I worry about the most just day to day is that there's a miscalculation or an issue where we have forces in close proximity. So how do we deal with that? First of all, there are international norms in the air, at sea, et cetera, that day to day the Russians adhere to as well. We've seen violations of that on their part, but it enables us to operate. It's deconfliction. That's correct. It's a good word. The second thing is, I think it's important that we communicate with them. Today we do that primarily through the media, et cetera, but we have, as you know, we have connection with the Russians for deconfliction. And I think that communication is important, because what I try to do in Eucom.
But do you have military to military? Do you have direct lines of communication with your opposite number in Russia, for example?
I do not today.
Don't you think that would be a good idea? If something, you could say, wait a minute, that missile was launched by accident, don't get alarmed. I mean, I think having that kind of communication, and at the higher level, at the State Department or at the White House level, there should be the opportunity anyway for this kind of communication.
We do have communication for deconfliction within OSD today. It is limited. I agree with you. I think communication is an important component of deterrence, for instance. But I think also, given Russia's behavior, there's some limitation to that. We shouldn't reward them for some of their bad behavior as well. So we should do what we need to do to ensure we're safe and we deconflict, and hopefully they will come.
I'm not suggesting warning them. I'm just suggesting if something occurs, you can get on the line and say, wait a minute, don't misinterpret that.
Roger.
That's where the concern comes.
That's correct.
We talked a lot, and I just want to associate myself with many of the other comments about the information war. To me, the specific answer to our failure to engage successfully in the information war goes back to, I think, 98 or 99, when we abolished USIA. There is no single point in the United States government today that is in charge of information, and I think it's inexcusable that the country that invented Hollywood and Facebook is being defeated on the information battlefield, and clearly that's part of the war that we're engaged in. Putin is achieving great success in Europe and across the world, and one would argue in many areas without firing a shot through effective use of information. And I think that our friends on the Foreign Relations Committee perhaps can consider that, but USIA was the point, and now we don't have it. So I hope we can recover that capacity sooner rather than later. Thank you very much, General.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Cruz, please.
Thank you very much, Senator Reid. General, good morning. Thank you for your service. The European theater continues to be a vital concern, a critical and complex region that will always be near the top of our national security priorities. I want to begin by focusing on the repeated reports we're seeing of Russia's growing support for the Taliban and for ISIS. General Nicholson testified last month that Russia is attempting to legitimize the Taliban and undermine the Afghan government. Just a few weeks ago, General Votel expressed his concerns regarding the extent to which Russia has managed to prop up the Assad regime. And in the same hearing, General Waldhauser said that Russia is trying to exert influence on the outcome of which entity emerges with control of the government inside Libya. That's a fairly comprehensive list of radical Islamic terrorist hotspots across the globe, from Afghanistan to the Middle East to Africa. And Russia seeking additional influence with each. How should this inform our future strategic choices with respect to Russia? And what impact would that have on your AOR?
Senator, thank you. I think those are all accurate. I agree with all their statements. I think actually that it's a part of Russia's intent to present themselves as a global power. In my view, where they're involved, they're not necessarily so concerned about the outcome, just that they can be a part of it. They can be seen as being a part of that. Whether it's an effective outcome, I don't think is as much of a concern to them. So that's what we need to take from this, is more so from our point of view, the fact that they're a spoiler, often in many of these cases. So we also have to engage them in this manner, and we have to engage globally as well in these places in order to ensure that we have the proper influence.
And if Russia were to succeed in undermining the Afghan government, what would the effect of that be on the NATO alliance?
It would be significant. I mean, NATO and the United States, in my view, must win in Afghanistan. And I agree, I've seen the influence of Russia of late, an increased influence in terms of association and perhaps even supply to the Taliban.
We've also seen over the past few months numerous instances of Russian aggression or hostile behavior, such as Russian jets buzzing the U.S. Navy destroyer Porter and numerous intercepts of U.S. aircraft in the Baltic Sea. And some of these incidents have been exceedingly unsafe. Recently, Russia also deployed a land-based cruise missile in clear violation of the INF Treaty. And also, a Russian spy auxiliary gathering intelligence ship conducted operations off the U.S. coast near our submarine bases. General, in your professional opinion, what should be the U.S.'s responses to these actions? How do we reduce Russia's flouting of international norms?
Senator, first of all, we must be strong in all that we do. We should confront them in each of these occasions or each of these incidents. And then we need to sail and fly every place that is within international norms and international airways and maritime. We just need to keep doing that. You know, for instance, in the Baltic or in the Black Sea, these encounters are their means of showing us their displeasure for us being there. We have every right to be there. We have, in fact, increased our presence, and I think that's the right step, increase our presence and insist on the fact that we have every right within international law to operate there and continue to do so.
Let me shift to a different question. American forces have conducted several deployments in support of Operation Atlantic Resolve to demonstrate our commitment to the stability of Europe. Recently, 400 soldiers and 24 AH-64 Apache helicopters deployed to Europe from Fort Bliss. However, earlier this month, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Lieutenant General Joseph Anderson, expressed concerns regarding sustainable readiness for the Army's future rotations. In essence, it sounds like soldiers that are coming home from one deployment will have less time to get ready and train before redeploying to the European theater. That or the Army will be forced to reduce its global commitments. General, do you share the same concerns as General Anderson regarding this rotation of forces, and what impact do you see in your AOR, and what do you recommend to improve the situation?
Senator, first of all, it's crucial that we continue the rotations within Europe for deterrence of Russia and for assurance and support of our allies, the commitments that we've made. But I do agree with General Anderson that, for instance, in the Army, as an Army officer, we're less than 1 to 2 dwell. We're turning our people very quickly. It's the reason that our chief has said that we need to grow our force. We need to focus on readiness as he's doing, because we are committed today at a very high rate.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. On behalf of the chairman, Senator Donnelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you very much for being here. We talk a lot about Russia's escalate to de-escalate strategy, or the idea that Russia has indicated through its words and its exercises that it sees the use of tactical nuclear weapons to supposedly de-escalate a conflict as a realistic option. How should NATO respond to this? And does the United States have the capabilities, whether through dual-use aircraft or strategic bombers, to deter such an escalatory move?
Senator, thank you. As I've said, we should be strong in the face of both their rhetoric, their actions, and their modernization. And we do have the capability to deter this. But we must remain strong, and we must continue to modernize given the pace of their modernization, so that in the future we continue our dominance.
I'm just wondering personally, do you think that Vladimir Putin and or the Russians believe that they could use a nuclear weapon without a similar scaled response?
That's a good question. I think about that a lot. You know, they have said publicly that they see the potential of the use of a nuclear weapon in what we would consider a tactical and conventional means, and that's just alarming.
Yeah, I think it's a clear misunderstanding of who we are as well.
Exactly.
Is what I think. I was privileged to be over in Georgia and Ukraine not too long ago. My friend and fellow Hoosier, Senator Lugar, helped create the Non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program to combat the spread of weapons of mass destruction. And while we were there, we spent a lot of time working with the Georgian and Ukraine government in efforts to counter the smuggling of those materials. Russia's destabilized borders in both these countries, and I'm concerned about the impact that's had on the ability to smuggle nuclear material through uncontrolled regions like eastern Ukraine. In Georgia, in fact, the Special Police Unit calls those kind of areas the black holes. It's a serious threat, given that the smuggling networks in these regions reach to the terrorist networks in the Middle East. That's the pipeline. And I was wondering what Eucom is doing to counter this effort at the present time.
Thank you, Senator. Your pipeline that you described is accurate. We have a transnational threats element within Eucom. It is whole of government. It relies mostly on not just the military piece, but mostly on other agencies within our government, connection with our partners and allies, with Europol, within EU, et cetera. It's a network, essentially, to help us highlight criminal networks. They're often very closely aligned and working with our terrorist networks. So that is one of the major things that we do. It's an important function, and it's a central part of our counter-transnational threats line of effort, which is one of our 5 lines of effort.
I want to follow up on some of the questions my colleague Senator Fisher asked earlier about Russia's INF violations and their deployment of nuclear-armed ground-launched cruise missiles. They have similar air and sea launch capabilities that don't violate the INF. So why do you think they're deliberately choosing to deploy a seemingly redundant capability on land?
Well, I think that it would provide them a capability internal to their country that gives much greater reach, simply put.
Do you feel that all of the steps being taken in Kaliningrad with the Iskander short-range missiles, that the goal of all of that is to divide us, to undermine NATO, to try to separate the commitment from one to the other?
Senator, I think that's part of it. I think much of what they do is to undermine confidence in NATO, undermine confidence in the West. You know, it's to threaten them with the idea that we can have control over a swath of your country or a number of countries in the region with these systems.
Yeah, I want to thank you. You have a real challenge on your hands at this time, but we want you to know we're 100% behind you, that we'll do everything we can to provide you with all you need, and that you can tell all of our friends and allies over there that we have their back.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General Scaparrotti, very much. It's good to know that you do support providing lethal aid to our Ukrainian friends. It seems like we all do agree that there should be that lethal assistance out there. And I've made this clear to this administration. I made it clear to the last administration as well. But I do hope that this administration decides to provide the assistance as soon as possible. And recently, I've grown increasingly concerned about Russia's use of tactical drones to spot for artillery and advanced technology for communication and GPS jamming. What types of advanced technologies are the Russians using against Ukraine and in other places as well? And is there specific technology that we should be considering when we are providing Ukraine the opportunity to counter that technology?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Actually, in Ukraine, what we see the Russians do is somewhat what they've done in Syria, and that's use the Ukrainian conflict as a place that they can test some of their new technologies or TTPs. And one of them, as you mentioned, is the sensor-to-shooter linkages between weapons systems and the use of drones, et cetera. You know, that's an issue or a problem that we're working on hard ourselves, because we're seeing a proliferation of that, not just with the Russians, but in some limited ways as well with terrorists from time to time. Mm-hmm. So we're working those technologies. The work with Ukraine provides us an opportunity to test some of the things that we're doing as well. And we simply need to make, you know, EW and those kinds of things available to them that can help counter what the Russian proxy forces are bringing to bear there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you. And you also mentioned that you were concerned about the stability in the Balkans. And on Tuesday, Ambassador Burns joined us here and highlighted Russia's increasing influence in Serbia. And specifically, he did mention the recent coup and assassination attempt in Montenegro that was orchestrated by the Russians in Belgrade. And in light of that effort targeting NATO interests, do you think we should have a more robust presence in Kosovo as a means to deter the Russians in the Balkans?
Senator, I do. I've been to the Balkans several times in recent months, primarily to learn more myself about the actual situation there, but also to bring focus to it. The Russians are active in undermining our efforts in the Balkans today, and we need to provide additional interagency focus. I think this is a matter of not just a military support with, say, the Kosovo Security Force, et cetera, which we have troops in. I think it's also a diplomatic and informational effort with us, and importantly with our partners. Because, as you know, NATO and the EU have a large role to play in the Balkans as well today and lead many of these organizational efforts. So we all need to work together And the military is a part of it. In that point, I would say we should not reduce our force size, particularly the Kosovo Security Force, because it's kind of the bedrock of stability right now. But we do need a much more robust diplomatic informational effort among the alliance there.
Absolutely. I think everything should be on the table at this point in reassuring and assisting our allies, our friends in the Balkans. And then just very quickly, you've mentioned the Cyber Center and how great it is, the Cyber Center that we have in Estonia. And I'll be meeting with their ambassador later to discuss their Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. So I'm really excited about that opportunity. And can you just tell me very briefly how well Eucom and NATO are prepared to defend against cyber attacks, especially those that are aimed at disrupting the elections that we'll see ongoing in Europe?
Well, first of all, within Eucom, I think we're postured well to deal with cyber. Cyber Command works very closely with us. And literally, it's a dynamic relationship because within the cyber domain, things change so rapidly. So when we just had our exercise here last month, we had an element from Cyber Command that acted as a component, per se, of Eucom reporting directly to me. So I think we're modernizing, we're moving forward, we've got good support, we've got a lot of work to do, particularly in capacity. Within NATO, NATO recently determined that cyber was a domain at the Warsaw Summit. That was important because what it did is it provided direction to work doctrine and policy in a much fuller way, which is the commander within NATO I need, and it gave me authorities to do more within cyber and NATO, which we need to do. So on the defensive side, pretty good. Beyond that, we're at the beginning of this in terms of NATO complete cyber capability.
And I do hope that's something that we can work on with them. Thank you for your great service, sir. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, General. I want to quickly ask about the importance of our non-military foreign assistance to your mission. When you appeared before this committee last year for your nomination as Eucom commander, you said, and I'm going to quote you here, "I strongly support the collaborative interagency approach. In my experience, it takes a network with all required agencies to defeat a threat network." So, General, do you still agree with that statement?
I do, absolutely.
The budget proposal put out by the Trump administration last week calls for a 29% cut to the State Department and significant cuts to other agencies with international responsibilities. General, would funding cuts to agencies that conduct diplomacy and development make your job as Eucom commander easier or more difficult?
It will make the job more difficult. I rely heavily on our relationships with the other agencies in our government. Within my headquarters, my POLAT is essentially one of my deputies, Ambassador Elliott. That gives you an example of the importance we place on it in Eucom. And many of the things I've talked about this morning, counter-transnational terrorism, our cell there, that's predominantly agency personnel from state and treasury. It's not uniformed personnel that do those actions for Eucom in the United States and Europe.
Yeah, thank you, General. I agree strongly on this. You know, Russia is actively working to destabilize countries along its border and undermine unity within the European Union and NATO. And they're doing this through a lot of indirect tactics, like enabling separatist forces and disseminating propaganda and fake news. They even launched a cyber attack to influence the results of our election recently. But Russia's also investing in other kinds of asymmetric capabilities, like disrupting communications through electronic warfare or working to evade U.S. and NATO surveillance, and investing in space and cyber tools. According to press reports and arms control analysis, they violated the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty by deploying ground-launched cruise missiles. The European Reassurance Initiative, ERI, has helped to counter some of these destabilizing activities The United States has deployed equipment and rotated forces into Central and Eastern Europe. But I'm wondering if this standard display of force is the best way to deter Russia now that Putin seems to rely more on indirect tactics. So what I want to ask, General, is let's set aside conventional forces and pre-positioned equipment for just a second, that it's there. What more can we do through ERI to address Putin's indirect and asymmetric tactics?
Through ERI, we're actually using these funds in some of the areas for the asymmetric activities to counter those malign influences. We have special operations forces that are supported by this, that do military information support operations and activities in support of U.S. government, particularly the embassy and the ambassadors in each of the countries. It supports us as well in cyber, in operations. In other ways, it may be, there are means that perhaps, for instance, support in naval forces are seen as a ship, et cetera, but they're actually supporting those capabilities in those ships support us in other ways in terms of asymmetric means. So I agree with you, and we do have a focus on that. I would last say that part of this is we're learning too. I mean, part of that effort through ERI is to make sure we understand how they operate in this, in this gray zone or hybrid activity, and that's supported here as well.
Thank you very much, General. I think we need to be smart about responding to and deterring Russia's asymmetric aggression. It seems to me that we can't think solely about deploying more troops and conventional military assets in Europe in order to counter Russia, that we've got to have a very wide perspective on this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wicker.
General, you mentioned on page 8 of your testimony the ceasefire violations in Ukraine. The majority of them are being committed by Russian-led forces. Senator Warren mentioned fake news. How helpful are the OSCE monitors in giving us the correct picture there? And then I have a couple of other questions about OSCE.
Senator, thank you. OSCE is very important to this. One of the issues is that their job is to monitor activities and compliance with the agreement on both sides of the line of contact. And in fact, Russia is well known that they're intimidate and restrict the mission monitors in their job, which is one of the things that we need to encourage and insist that Russia stop doing and begin to allow the OSCE to do its job properly.
What can we do in that respect?
Well, I think in that respect, sir, we need to bring the international community together with respect to Russia and their lack of movement on the Minsk. They say publicly they're in support of the Minsk agreement, but personally, I think if you watch their actions, there doesn't seem to be steps taken on their part to do just that.
Okay, they're doing a lot of exercises there and in all of Europe. One of the techniques they use to try to get around their commitments is the SNAP exercise designation. Can you tell us about that?
These exercises reflect Putin's focus on his modernization. It reflects his intent to make their forces more responsive, to improve their mobilization, but it also is a part of intimidation, I would say. The SNAP exercises themselves are typically broadcast as much smaller than they end up being. Some of them are not announced at all, in contravention to the Vienna document and the treaties that we have there. So that's very disturbing, and it's a way that you can have miscalculation, And we know in the past, at least with Crimea, they've used an exercise to shield what was a violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine.
But they also continue to do exercises in Crimea. What's the significance of the most recent Russian exercise in Crimea?
To me, the significance is that, well, there's several of them. One is that they do both defensive and offensive operations as a part of that SNAP exercise. They rehearsed attacks on the eastern border, actually flew toward it. Those kinds of activities, which are very disturbing and create, you know, a lot of angst along the eastern border, and within Eucom being able to watch this and understand what's their real intent. So it's the way they run the operations and without transparency that creates the problem. They have the right to do military exercises. They need to do them in a way that's constructive, in line with our agreements.
But they don't have a right to do the no-notice exercises under their agreements.
Under the agreement, it has to be announced if it's over 9,000 troops, and it has to be observed if it's 13,000 or more. There has to be an allowance for observers if we choose to do so, and their SNAP exercises are much, much larger than that, almost 100,000 if you take them, and if you take them in all the different exercises that happen simultaneously.
Should we be concerned about trends in Russian activity in the North Atlantic?
Yes, we should. They're more aggressive. They are reestablishing bases in the Arctic and North Atlantic. We have to go back to establishing the same deterrence that we practiced during the Cold War, in my view.
Is there a forum where we are engaging with them diplomatically about that?
I don't know the forum personally. I know that we've engaged with them diplomatically, but I couldn't tell you the forum, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, you've mentioned several times the importance of the whole-of-government approach to, particularly to reassure our NATO allies, and you're concerned that the contemplated cuts to the State Department, for example, and the Treasury Department by this administration would raise major concerns for you, also shared by Secretary Mattis. Is that concern that you express shared by our other combatant commanders?
Senator, I would say that you'd have to ask them directly for their own personal opinion, but I think it's a matter, I will answer it this way. We operate as with our interagency, and most of what we do today, even in the more direct actions that we've taken in, say, Afghanistan or Iraq, have relied upon an interagency approach, a whole-of-government approach. That's the way we traditionally operate.
So it sounds as though that your concern or your commitment to the importance of a whole-of-government approach is one that is shared by our other commanders. You mentioned that there is a possibility, of course, of Russia's use of nuclear weapons, and that there's always that possibility. But on the other hand, Russia has cyber capability that can be very effective, and one wonders why they should resort to conventional warfare if they can use cyber to do all kinds of damage. So, for example, Russia is currently conducting cyber operations in various countries, such as the Ukraine, Montenegro, by attacking military communications and secure databases, as well as power grids. In addition, they are using fake news and information operations to impact elections across the globe. And this has magnified a wave of populist nationalism in Europe and impacted the recent U.S. elections. And I think that you mentioned, you described that you are working with our allies to create a defensive approach to the cyber operations that Russia has deployed. I'm wondering, though, has the question of what the U.S. would do if if Russia's activities in affecting and disrupting the elections of our NATO allies, whether the question has come up where, at some point we would say that these kinds of cyber attacks rise to the level of an act of war that would trigger reaction from us to support our NATO allies.
Senator, that's a matter of policy, but I think, we're a member of NATO. NATO has said that Article 5 could be triggered by a cyber event. We're a member of that. So I think there is the occasion that could occur, but again, what we would do and what level that would be that would create a response is a policy decision.
Something that we need to
Yes.
definitely discuss at the policy level. I think you mentioned in response to another question that regarding our mill-to-mill communications with Russia that we don't necessarily want to reward their bad behavior. And I'm wondering, based on your communication with the administration, do you know what the administration's position is on the current Russian sanctions? And would rescinding these sanctions affect stability in Europe, in your view?
Yeah, I haven't had the discussion with my leadership on the sanctions, Senator. I think that we must retain the sanctions. We put them in place as a result of their annexation of Crimea. It's another way that we, both the United States and the alliance in Europe, strongly show that is unacceptable, and we will maintain strength in the face of Russia's activities.
So wouldn't any kind of cutting back on those sanctions signal some kind of a retreat or weakness on the part of our U.S. commitment to NATO, for example?
Well, I think personally that if we were to relieve or cut back on those, Putin would see that as a very good thing, and it would reward him standing fast long enough to perhaps survive, the sanctions themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I am the acting chairman right now, and I have the pleasure of calling on myself. I'm going to say, for the record, what needs to be said here, and that is that if we want to send the right signal to Russia, all of the work we're doing, that you and your command are doing, which is so important, is an integral piece of that. All of the work we do with our allies in Europe is an integral piece of that. But a big piece of it is having a commander-in-chief that will say the right things to Russia. And we do not have a commander-in-chief right now who is willing to say out loud what everyone knows about Putin and what he's doing in Europe and what he tried to do in the United States. And until we have a commander-in-chief that is willing to speak out against this thug and his behavior, I don't know that all the great work that you and your command can do is ever going to move the needle enough. And I've said it, and I feel better. You don't have to say a word, not your place to say a word. I understand the role of the commander-in-chief in your life, but I wanted to say it and put it on the record. I was in Estonia. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's going on in other places in non-traditional warfare. I was in Estonia last summer, and I was shocked how many Estonians told me, we went to a coffee shop and we were talking to those who spoke English, and they were saying how they really wanted to be part of NATO, but they were worried about the NATO soldiers being able to rape the citizens of Estonia and not be held illegally accountable. And I, of course, went, what? And as it turns out, this is the other thing Russia is doing. That Russia is pushing propaganda through Estonia that NATO is somehow going to damage their sovereignty in terms of the enforcement of rule of law. Could you speak to that, General, that method that they use to try to undermine the support of NATO in the countries that they have designs on?
You stated it clearly. They have, in fact, we are now in NATO. The first forces are going in to the four nations, Estonia being one of them. And we've already had a couple of incidents of just complete untruth. Incident never occurred within days of the troops arriving. We prepared for this. We expected it. We were able to respond to those truthfully and quickly and debunk the false story. But it's something that I expect will continue. And as you said, it obviously has, their disinformation obviously has some influence. If there is a consistent message from Russia in the East, it is to undercut the credibility of the United States and NATO at large, consistently.
And do we have a robust enough response to this kind of disinformation campaign? Are we focusing enough on this part of the warfare?
I think we're focused on it. I don't think we have a robust enough response at this point. I think we have to both as the U.S. and also as allies come together and take a more aggressive confrontation of Russia, particularly in this gray area.
Yeah, I would certainly hope that would be on NATO's agenda as to strategies moving forward to combat this kind of insidious disinformation that really does strengthen the efforts of Russia to use the military might to intimidate and eventually move into countries that have no desire to be occupied. I also want to take a brief moment to talk about something I'm on like a broken record on, and that's OCO. The Congressional Research Service recently published an extensive report on OCO funding, and it states the obvious that those of us who are on this committee are painfully aware of, that this began truly for a contingency after 9/11 and is now morphed into something very ugly off the books, in that we now have the European Reassurance Initiative in the OCO budget. We now even have base budgeting in the OCO budget. Talk, if you will, from your perspective as you are asked to draw up your financial needs for your command, how you all are making a decision inside the Pentagon what you put in OCO and what you put in the base budget.
Well, ma'am, both, for instance, I'll start with Eucom. You know, we have the outline of the use of ERI, what it's intended to do based on Congress's direction. I have a process where my component commands, the other services, make recommendations for funding an ERI. And I have a board that eventually comes to me for decision that first of all, asks the questions, is that in support of the intent of ERI? And if not, why is it in here? We'll push it off to the base budget. Or even there's areas where I think, you know what, that's a broader activity we're funding. It really ought to be in the base, not in ERI. So I have that system myself within Eucom, and we draw that line hard because we appreciate ERI and we want to maintain the credibility of it and how we use it. It's fundamental to doing our job in Eucom. Within OSD, there's a very deliberate process run by the DepSecDef and the vice chairman that all of us as combatant commands take part in, and it is very detailed in terms of a look at each command and what we propose for budget, what we intend to put in, and it looks a cross-section as well, comparison of each other. So it's a deliberate process. I would just say that I'm in favor of moving funds into the base. We need predictable funding,
right,
so that we can actually make longer-term decisions and have more continuity, and that would be better, I think, for the force as a whole as well.
Wait, this would be a good time for us to have the discipline, as the President has presented a budget that is, frankly, it's not a huge increase to the military. I think he's trying to make everybody believe it's a big increase to the military. I think it's only 3% higher than what President Obama recommended in his budget. But nonetheless, it is an increase when everything else is getting cut. I think this would be a good time for us to bite the bullet, pardon the use of that particular analogy, but I think it would be time for us to be honest with the American people and put all of these items into the base budget so the American people understand what we're spending on the military as it compares to other parts of our budget. I thank you for your service. I thank all the men and women who serve under your command. I think you've got a really important job now. I understand that the importance of what you do now has been exacerbated by what Russia has done over the last 12 months and what they continue to do in democracies across the world. And we're depending on you to be our frontline eyes and ears to their aggression, and I thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to join in thanking you and the men and women under your command for their service in a critical area of the world for us and our national security. I understand you've just come back from a trip to Israel. And I'd like to ask you what security concerns the Israelis raised with you, focusing specifically on the Iranian development, continuing development of their ballistic missiles.
Yes, sir. I just, well, first of all, Israel is an extremely close ally of ours, special ally. We in Eucom have an excellent relationship with them. It's nearly daily contact. One of my missions is support of Israel in their defense. And so as I visited, their Chad and I and their senior leaders obviously talked about their concerns about Iranian malign influence as well as their missile capabilities. We work closely with them to support and complement their missile defense, for instance. And in fact, one day of that trip, I met their air missile defense commander and went to look at some of their sites to ensure that we in Eucom are supporting that fully. Beyond that, we discussed, for instance, their concern about Hezbollah and fighters gaining experience in Syria and other places and returning, and what that might mean in the future. A concern about, obviously, Syria and the tri-border region as the conflict in Syria continues. So they live in a very tough neighborhood, and you can look in nearly every direction and have a threat.
Is there more that we can and should be doing to strengthen their defenses against that kind of missile threat?
Senator, we're doing all that we can. I mean, we work with this closely to ensure that that we do, in fact, reinforce their defense. In fact, there are more things we can do with their missile defense. We have people there this week working on that as well. I mean, it's a matter of modernization, change in environment, but we're doing that. To maintain, their military edge is very, very important, and also to maintain the war stocks that we've committed to them for use.
But there is more that we can do, and we are doing it.
We are, and we're focused on support of Israel.
I take it, speaking of ballistic missiles, that you would agree with General Selva, who testified earlier this week during the House Armed Services Committee that that Russia is violating the INF treaty.
Yes, I agree.
And I think in your testimony you used the word concerning. This is a extraordinarily important area, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is. And it's an enhancement in capability that has a direct impact throughout the theater, from my perspective.
And that's because, as you put it well in your testimony, it increases Putin's asymmetric options as this missile capability is built. The whole reason that the treaty exists is to stop this kind of development because it threatens to destabilize the whole confrontation, not confrontation, but the array of forces in that part of the world, correct?
That's correct.
Have you made recommendations as to what we should be doing about it?
I've made recommendations in the sense of that we need to respond to this, we need to be strong in the face of it. And I think the actions that we've recommended in Eucom in terms of posture, force structure, et cetera, are all a part of this, a part of the response that we need to have for Russia writ large.
Is there consideration, to the extent you may know of it, about additional diplomatic or military action that the administration may be taking to counter this threat to our security?
Yeah, at this time, I haven't had that discussion yet with that specific topic in terms of policy actions that might be taken.
Have you any expectation that that discussion will occur?
Yes, I do.
Can you give us a general time frame?
No, I can't. But I would expect we'll have it. Yes, sir.
Well, I would urge that it be done sooner rather than later. With all due respect, I'm not nearly as well informed as you, but I'm extremely alarmed by this violation of the INF Treaty and what it represents strategically in that part of the world and what it reflects in the way of Russian intentions around the world. Thank you, General.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fortunately, your microphone was off for the editorial comment. General, a couple of quick questions. Do you consider RT, a Russian television, an agent of the Russian government?
Yes, I do, sir.
And it's my understanding that not only are they using RT in Europe, but they're also sniffing around or, in fact, looking into acquisitions of commercial television and radio capacity in Europe.
That's correct. I've been told in a number of countries that they're using fronts, but essentially buying local TV, and in one case recently, a social media network that's influential, particularly with the young in the Baltics.
So when you say buying local TV, you're talking about TV stations, not airtime.
That's right. They're buying TV stations and a social network company that does work on social media.
This is one more area of their, what I consider very effective playing of a weak hand. They are aggressing upon us at a low dollar cost, but aggression nonetheless.
Yes, sir, I agree.
Different subject. Iceland. I was in Iceland recently, and it struck me as an incredible strategic location. Keflavik Air Base was dismantled, or not dismantled, it's still there, but it was deactivated in around, I think, 2004 or 5. It strikes me that this is such a strategic location. Do you believe that we should at least consider, subject to the approval of the people of Iceland, some reconstitution of our capacity there? I know we have rotational forces there, but something more than that.
Senator, we do have rotational forces through there, but I think we should consider it. Again, it comes back to my concern about the high North Atlantic, and the increasing Russian threat from the North Atlantic Fleet there. And so that area is important to us to increase our activities with our allies to ensure that we deter Russia, and we're very knowledgeable of their activities as well.
It struck me as a large, unsinkable aircraft carrier in the midst of the most strategic spot in the North Atlantic.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And you know, Senator King, I met with the president of Iceland, and I know that General Scaparrotti has too. We'd have a PR challenge there as well with the people of Iceland. Isn't that true, General?
Yeah, I believe we do. And I think I think NATO could do more work there as well in terms of perspective or receptiveness, Senator.
They would be more receptive if it were a NATO kind of commitment rather than just the United States.
Well, in discussions, that's what's been discussed with me as this SAC year.
Well, I thank you, General, and I appreciate obviously the important information you've provided the committee. And I'd just like to mention again what Senator King brought up, and that is this whole issue of this information warfare that's going on right now is something that crosses a lot of boundaries between state and defense and intelligence and other agencies of government. And yet, every time I turn around and talk particularly to one of the smaller countries, that's one of their biggest issues is this propaganda that the Russians and fake news, et cetera, ranging from what their obvious attempts at changing the outcome of the French election to the pressure on Latvia to alienate their Russian-speaking population. So I hope we'll move that issue up on our priority list. Seems to me it's kind of like the weather. We talk about it, but we really don't do anything about it. And there is a precedent for it. It was called the Cold War. How many people do we know that after the wall came down said, I listened to Radio Free Europe, I listened to the Voice of America, it kept hope alive. Why can't we reconstitute something along those lines to get the message out? I don't think it would be hard to counter Russian propaganda given the kind of lifestyle they have in Russia. So I hope you'll think about it, and we'll continue to think about it. But whenever you get one of these issues that involves more than one agency of government, as you know, we have much more difficulty, whether it be cyber or whether it be this information challenge that we're facing now. So we thank you, General, for visiting with us again, and thanks for the great work. And Senator King will come to Brussels and spend time with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My privilege.